Let's take a little trip down the Nile. If I can find my Nile trip here. Let's see where we are.
Get a rest.
Well, let's not take a trip down now. Let's take a trip in the Atlantic. We'll go a different direction. We'll do that one after lunch. If I can find out where the start of this thing is. There it is. I took you up, we went up a little bit to the American Revolution. Let's now take up from the American Revolution and we'll talk a little bit about history. Historical point of view, then we'll get into the powers behind it. Let's move back now to 1815. I'd like to go earlier. There's so much nice stuff happening in the 17th, 16th, or 18th century, the 1700s, from a conspiratorial line. One of the interesting things, by the way, as an aside here, we'll talk a little bit about money, is that the American Constitution is a very peculiar document in the fact that it does not set up a central bank to create paper money. In fact, in Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, it has a very interesting little statement in there. And that statement is that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin tender, lawful tender in payment of debt. That is the requirement of hard money. We have this in another place too, that the United States is not to issue bills of credit. This idea of the Constitution, if the government's credit is good, they should have no trouble of borrowing. If they got to go to create a phony bank in order to borrow from, then that's because their credit is no good. If that credit can be made legal tender, if that credit can be made forced upon the people to take, then the government is going to be irresponsible. If it has to go in the marketplace and borrow, then it has to be responsible. The thing is that the founding of our Constitution was a battle that has been going on ever since, and I'm afraid our side is losing. And that is, there is basically two groups of people in the monetary field, two views. One is what is called hard money, and the other is soft or paper money. The paper money people have always pushed the idea that we need flexible currency, we got to be able to expand the money supply and things of this sort, that we need a flexible money supply. And the thing about a paper currency is this: you can always create more of it. Now let's take a look back through history. One of the things that has been the dream of people who are seeking power is a money supply unlimited, because it's a very important thing for power, is to be able to do what you want and to pay for it. The oldest game of the prince of the realm has been clipping the coin of the realm. The clip the coin has been the major occupations of sovereigns all down in history. Here, the Spanish pieces of 8, which is a little over an ounce of gold, in a matter of 100 years, kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. The same name on it, smaller and smaller, until it got so small they had to disband it because it got lost in the linings of the pockets and people couldn't find a thing. You see, debasing the coin, debasing the money is the thing that all governments want to do, and it destroys every economy as it takes place. Our money is called a dollar. The word dollar comes from the word thaler, which is a name of a money printed in Austria by the Thaler family, a private family and a private company which for over 450 years produced a coin that never changed in content. It was the best money of the world. People all over the world recognize the thaler as the hallmark of excellency in money. And we wanted to give the illusion to the American people that our dollar was as good as a thaler. Well, it was. One, it was defined in gold, redeemable, fully backable. Backed. Today, Fort Knox has no gold. There is no backing. Our government is totally bankrupt by declaration. You do not have lawful money in your pocket, you have legal tender. It is not lawful money, because under the law, the only thing that's money is gold and silver coin. It is the only lawful money. And in 1933, but they said we can't use that anymore. So they took away the only lawful money there is, and they haven't replaced it with any, which leaves the government in a lot of legal problems. But anyway, if we could get the old dream of the alchemist was to find some way of changing base metal into precious metal. If you could find a formula, and these people spent centuries searching for the formula to change lead into gold. Why, if we could change lead into gold, think how rich you could get, right? Well, they finally figured it out. It's called the Federal Reserve Bank. They sit with paper, printing up pictures on pieces of paper and calling it worth the same as gold. Paper gold. This is the biggest boon that ever was for a club of people. And watch how this game started. Back in, we're going to take the Rothschilds back at the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. The purpose of the Napoleonic Wars was to establish national banks. What we had established is the Bank of Rothschild, established really the bank, seized the Bank of England during the Napoleonic Wars under Nathan Rothschild. The bank in Germany was the Bank of Rothschild in Frankfurt on the Main. The Bank of Austria was the Bank of Rothschild of Solomon Rothschild, who couldn't even be a citizen of Austria or own property because he was a Jew. He just owned Austria. He owned the railroads, he owned the mines, he owned Austria, but he couldn't be a citizen. All right? Kalman Rothschild set up the bank at Naples, the Rothschild Bank, which financed Italy. And the French bank was under Louis Rothschild. And Louis Rothschild, for an example, after Napoleonic Wars in 1817, 18 during the Restoration, the Rothschilds weren't invited into the banker club as they thought they should be. And so when the Restoration was taking place and the government was financing itself, it invited the bankers, the French bankers, in. And during the meeting, which Rothschild was not invited to, the French bourse, the stock market, collapsed that very day. And Louis Rothschild arrives with his carriage, with his 12 white horses and his ermine robes, and Louis Rothschild walks in to Versailles and sits there while the king comes out and bows to Louis Rothschild. And Louis Rothschild now walked in, dismissed all the bankers, financed the French government, and bought it. After that, every single king, and even Napoleon Bonaparte II, the first thing they did when coming to power, they did not go to Versailles. They went to another Versailles, looked just like it, the home of Louis Rothschild, and came and bowed and paid their respects to the monarch of France as he stood in the doorway in his ermine robes and accepted them in for their homage. All right? Now, this small group of people controlled the money business, just like some control the oil business or car business. Their business is money. It's a simple little thing, isn't it? Now notice at the war, what the real war accomplished. The Napoleonic Wars accomplished this. Bank of Austria, remember that's Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, all of that is Austria at that time. The Bank of Germany, which was all of the Germanic princes and so forth. The Bank of France, which was the biggest country, the most powerful and wealthiest nation, and the most populated nation in the world at the day. And the Bank of Italy, which controlled Italy and the Mediterranean. And, of course, the Bank of England, which had the British Empire, which isn't bad. Oh, one day, on the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan Rothschild bought England. He purchased it by late afternoon. As the battle started in England, of course, the government was very heavily in debt. Nathan Rothschild had his agents, or he, standing in the open, selling British bonds as fast as he could sell them, dumping British bonds on the market as Wellington is lining up to meet Napoleon at Waterloo. But he had his agents secretly buying bonds. And as the other holders in interest in England saw the bond Nathan Rothschild selling, they panicked and started selling at 5 and 4 and 3 and 2 cents on a dollar, English bonds, dumping them because England was so far in debt. If they lost the Battle of Waterloo, they couldn't pay. And Nathan is very quietly buying up the British debt. He bought the British government. And by the time the news of Wellington's victory arrived, Nathan Rothschild owned the country. A nice little day's operation. By the way, he operated through courier pigeons. He knew what was going on. He had, while the rest of them were blind, Nathan wasn't operating through guesswork. He had an inside track. You know, your judgment is only as good as your information, right? See? Well, now let's take a look at the setup after the fall, after the Battle of Waterloo, and the reconstruction of Europe, the Council of Vienna. We have so-called the 100 Years of Peace, 1815 to 1914, start of the First World War, and the Great Enlightened Era, the Victorian Age, right? Let's take a look at the world in 1819, at the time of the peace treaty. The world is basically then divided up into 5 political economic ideologies. 1, Pan-Americanism, is expressed in the Monroe Doctrine, which said, what happens in the Western, in the Eastern Hemisphere is not our business. What happens in the Western Hemisphere is totally our business. The Eastern world, keep your hands out of the Western world. And it wasn't some negotiated treaty. It was a declaration of position. We stated, if you want to come and take 1 inch of the Western Hemisphere, any Eastern Hemisphere country, we're going to give you everything we got in the Home Office. It was a declaration, a war made in advance, so everybody knew what the game was. Now that's real foreign policy. You know what our foreign policy is today? Our foreign policy is to have no policy and to do whatever we're told to do by somebody, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But remember, first one is Pan-Americanism. Number 2 was the doctrine of Asia for the Asiatics. The doctrine, you see, that the round eyes, the Occidentals, had taken the major ports and the major places of Europe or of Asia, and Asia was under the control of European control by 1840. And the dream of many Asiatics, particularly in the powerful circles, was to break out and to drive the round eyes out of Asia. All right? And this is ideology 2. Ideology 3, Pan-Slavism. Pan-Slavism said this, that the Slavic peoples of the world, the people of Eastern Europe, had always been a downtrodden group who had been at the mercy of the Western Europeans. And that because of the weakness, their own weakness, it was essential that all Slavs band together in mutual defense against any intrusion in the Slavic world. Kind of a defense pact, if you would like. Now this doctrine stated this, that Mother Russia, the mother of all Slavs, had the obligation at any cost and at any time to enter into any contest for the defense of Slavs anywhere. Okay? Ideology 4. Ideology 4 is the ideology of Pan-Germanism. And Pan-Germanism was this. England, or the Crown, controlled the seas and controlled all maritime shipping, and still does. Why is the United States merchant fleet so small? Because we are told what our merchant fleet can be by the Crown. They are the central monopoly issuing center, which allows, proportions the world market in mercantile shipping, in ocean freight. And of course, the vast majority of that is for the club members in London. But anyway, this has been the case as England, of course, went out not to take territory, but to take sea bases. Sea bases both militarily and coaling stations in the Auckland Islands, at Gibraltar, at Port Said, at Cyprus, at the Cape of Good Hope, at the Bahamas, at Bermuda, at Singapore, at Calcutta, as you go around the world, at Hong Kong. Every place of all the major shipping lines, of the coaling stations and the outfitting stations had to be in British control. They didn't need the world. They only needed the sea bases. Therefore, they controlled the world commerce. And therefore, world commerce, mainly, almost 85% of it in the last century, went in British bottoms. Now, I say British bottoms. They weren't belonged to the British people. The English people didn't get it. England wasn't getting it. It was a small club of men in London, which we know as the Crown, or don't know as the Crown, which we will find out about the Crown in a few minutes. This small elite club is basically had the world monopoly on freight. Now, you see, when you had laws such as were repugnant to the American colonialist, and what were the navigation acts? These acts said this, that the United States, or American colonies, to sell to anybody in the world, must first ship to London and sell it in London and be resold by an English merchant to the other people in the world. And that the American colonies could not buy anything except from London. Therefore, if we wanted to buy sugar from Jamaica, the Jamaican sugar had to be shipped to London and then sold by a London merchant and shipped to the colonies. This gave the London merchants total monopoly control and the ability to rob all colonialists because we had to pay their price. See, the profits always ended up in the Crown from world shipping. When they controlled the ships that the goods went in, and they bought the goods and sold the goods, they become what is known as a monopsonist. A monopolist is when you have a single seller. A monopsonist is when you have a single buyer. He controls the purchase. A&P for years has been a monopsonist. What they do in the food market affects the price. They're so big that their buying or not buying is tantamount to a fall or smash in the market, and therefore they can control the price on both ends, both the selling and the buying, as a monopsonist and a monopolist. Well, anyway, the Crown had figured this out. And so what you had was pan-Germanism, and this went this way, that the major producers in the world at that time were Germany. And yet Germany did not receive the benefits of their labor because they were forced to sell everything to British bottoms and to the Crown, and so that the profits off of German labor was being taken by the Crown. The dream of the Germans was to band together in the Reich and to break out, that they could run their own merchant fleet, ship their own goods into the world markets, and reap their own profits from their own labors. This was the dream of pan-Germanism, that all Germans must unite together wherever they be. Because much of Austria, you see, this is like Adolf Hitler. See, Hitler was raised in Austria. He was a German. And he couldn't understand as a boy, how come all Germans aren't in Germany? You see, his dream was put all Germans in Germany so Germany could break out. Anyway, he saw that issue. Now, the fifth ideology is the Anglo-Saxon world rule. That the Anglo-Saxons are the superior master race, and led by England, the key of this, has the obligation to control and direct the affairs of man. It is some sort of divine right to take care of all little brown babies, yellow babies, red babies, and every other kind of baby that they took upon themselves. It was their moral obligation for the British to send their men out in the thin red line to be slaughtered on every single field in every desert in order to propagate and further the necessities of the Crown. Because it was England which was going to give order and semblance to the chaos of the world. You can't leave this up to those little yellow people to figure it out and to run their affairs, and those little brown people to run their affairs and so forth. England had to be everywhere. Everywhere. Every treaty, every place, there was the British representative, wasn't it? The Crown is always. Now let's see what this led to. After the Battle of Waterloo, we now see a series of conquests of England during this great peaceful age, such as Egypt, to Sudan, Rhodesia, Orange Land, most of Africa, Kenya, and all the rest. They also took the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. You talk about greedy. They didn't quit. They also took India, of course, in the 1850s. And they also took China in 1820. Now, 23. You don't believe it, China, because they didn't raise the flag over China. They took it and kept the empress in house arrest, and the royal family in house arrest for the next 80 years. But it was a crown colony. It was seized in that wonderful moral military operation known as the Opium Wars. You see, the crown wanted to make some money by selling a stuff called opium to all of these nice little Chinese. They didn't amount to anything anyway, because of course they had to direct and control these Chinese. So they were peddling opium. And the Chinese government outlawed opium. And the British were going to make the Chinese government change their mind. And so they went in there and started killing little Chinese so the little Chinese would be able to have their liberty to buy opium from the crown, which was making a nice little... As Gladstone said, there was no more despicable war in the history of mankind than the Opium War and England's participation in it. This is one of the greatest blots of all on British history. Now, watch what happens. First is the problem of the major problem that England, or the crown has from a strategic point of view. That is, while England controls the sea, the land routes are naturally in Russia. Russia is in Asia, onto China, Japan, India, Afghanistan, the Middle East, and in Europe. Russia is on the Pacific, the Persian Gulf, and the Black Sea, and enters to the Mediterranean. If Russia ever became a real political power, Russia would be strategically in the strategic area to be both the political and the economic center of the world. From a geopolitical point of view, Russia is most strategic. Russia had to be kept backward, and they have been, and they are today. Here's Russia. We're told it's a great superpower. They haven't been able to take the Dardanelles. They've been trying for 1,100 years to take the Dardanelles. They have fought battle after battle and massed millions upon millions on the line to get the Dardanelles. In 1,100 years, they haven't got it. And it's only about 80 miles or 100 miles away. Why can't they take the Dardanelles? You notice, we let them have Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and all of that, but we didn't let them have Greece, did we? After the Second World War. Oh no. They were to look like a superpower, but never have the potential of becoming one. The show without the substance. Here's the great superpower of Russia. What have they taken? In the Second World War, they fought with U.S. tanks, 7,000 P-39s, their rifles, their guns, their railroad, all shipped from here. Where was Russia? Russia supplied cannon fodder, yes, for the field. They supplied blood. That's what they got. They threw a lot of bodies in there. But without our supplies, their bodies would be nothing but ground up like meat grinders by Hitler's armies. No, they can only fight so long as we support them. They have no potential or possibility to stand on their own. To show you this, here is the great mighty superpower having trouble with Afghanistan. What have they taken in all of these last 30, 40 years? Nothing. And yet we're talking about the great war, aggressive Russia. What have they actually done? Let's get through all the verbiage in the papers and all of this talk. I mean, the fact is, it's zilch. The MiG fighters, the Russian MiG fighters, not one of them is built in Russia. Would you want to fly in a plane built in Russia? If you've ever been to Russia, you wouldn't want to get an airplane. Look and see what's made in Russia. The irons won't iron, let alone. If you can't make an iron, electric iron, what are you going to do making a jet airplane? They're made in Czechoslovakia. You won't make no Russian pilot would get in a Russian-built airplane. Anyway, well, leave that as it may be. Let's see what happened to these ideologies. Ideology 1. In late 1890s, in a series of agreements made between our leaders here in this country and the leaders of the Crown and the leaders of the British government, the United States secretly agreed to abandon the Monroe Doctrine, and that we would join the Crown in the Anglo-Saxon rule of the world. The reason for that is this. England is a nation not of large population. England has been, for the last couple centuries, able to man a fleet, but never the ability to put in large quantities of cannon fodder on the lines of a land army. After the Napoleonic Wars, the condition of the treaty was basically what it did is made France the vassal state of England. And the French army now lined up in Africa, in the Sudan, in Indonesia. And it was the French who supplied the cannon fodder in the field. The English supplied the naval power. It was La Grande Armée, which was to impose on land the edicts of the crown. By the way, this crown is not the queen or the king. That's the sovereign. The crown is a club that meets in a separate sovereign nation. That nation is called London. London is a small little town with only a population of 2,000 people. London is made up of 13 different cities. The actual city of London is from the Tower down to the Strand. And in there, very few homes or no apartment buildings. What's there is the Fleet Street, controller of all communications in the British Empire, the Temple Bar, the control of all the law offices, all right, the World Masonic Headquarters, Victoria Station, the Bank of England. Now, when the Queen goes to London, not when she's just drawn into the shop, but when she officially comes to London, she goes to her sovereign and bows before her sovereign. And that sovereign stands there with his staff and his chain and his medallion of his Masonic thing. He is called the Lord Mayor. And she bows to the monarch of this separate sovereign realm called London, which is not subject to British law, not subject to the Parliament, and not subject to the Queen. She is a foreigner when she enters London. The capital of England is not London. You go across the street and down around the corner, and that's where the capital is. But look in the sign. It doesn't say London. It says Westminster. The capital of London is Westminster. The capital of England is Westminster. Excuse me. The capital of England is Westminster, not London. There are no government offices in London. Okay? The Queen is not coronated in London. She's coronated in Westminster, at Westminster Abbey, across the street from the Parliament. And down the garden is out back, and you go down the garden, and there's Buckingham Palace. That's in Westminster, which is part of England. London is not. It's like the Vatican, which is a sovereign nation. And it's like the Villa de Malta in Rome, which is also a sovereign nation. The Maltese Masonic headquarters is a separate sovereign nation, 3 acres, I've been there, in Rome. All the Catholic nations send diplomatic representatives to this sovereign nation called the Maltese Order, Masonic knighthood. All right? Now ask yourself a question. You look across the river right as you go into the gate of Villa de Malta, and you see the cathedral. How's it? St. Paul's, the Basilica. And if you go, well, we'll get that later. I got the pictures. Let's get that. Anyway, the point is that France, by the First World War, had left so many dead bodies around the world, the French wouldn't fight anymore. They were tired of dying for Englishmen. And what the the Crown needed to do was get new cannon fodder. And that's why the agreement in the 1890s with the United States. And the agreement was that we would provide the blood for the Crown in return for partnership in the game. And since that time, notice, up until that time, what happened in Europe was not our business. Immediately we proved ourselves by the Spanish-American War, by entering into Spain's affairs, right? And now our ships arrive where? In Manila. We're on the other side of the world. Nobody even knew where Manila was, and yet there Dewey is steaming in there with the guns blazing, right? And now he steams out of there and he steams into Tokyo. Yokohama, and he seizes Japan, right? The open door policy. We were going to teach those little yellow guys that they were going to go along our game. Well, anyway, so Pan-Americanism was the first to go down the tube. The second one went down the tube. Well, we can say two of them went down together, and that was Pan-Germanism and Asia for the Asiatics. Let's go to Asia for just a few minutes. After the Opium Wars, there was continuous revolution in China. Rebellion upon rebellion. They were led and formed together in an association which we can call the Nationalist Chinese Movement. Now, this nationalist movement fought some 40 wars of one intensity after another for the rest of that century. There was continual uprisings against British rule, being put down, and sometimes by Americans being hauled in the Boxer rebellions, and Germans and other allies that they could get in. But notice what the payoff was. We got Shanghai. The British took Singapore. The Portuguese got, what's that place down that starts with M? The Germans had their city. Every river valley of China, all commerce coming out of China, ended up into a European port, so that every last dollar of Chinese labor went into European hands. All right? We bled China white, if you can use the word for it. We bled it. I'm saying the Europeans bled it. The Crown bled it. Now, Japan, realizing what the situation and having the big movement of Asiatic independence, was the Japanese movement. That is, that Japan would be the leaders of organizing and uniting all the yellow race in the overthrow of white rule, of European rule. And to do this, what they did is, one, they made an agreement with the Crown that they would impose and be the police force for the Crown in Asia in return for modern armaments. And we see Vickers and so forth immediately coming in, building their gun plants and so forth in Japan. All of the armaments in Japan were built by British firms. And Japan became armed and proved herself at the Battle of Tsushima when they defeated the largest navy in the world, the Russian fleet, Imperial fleet, High Fleet, both the Pacific Fleet and the Baltic Fleet. At the Tsushima without the loss of a ship. Only one Russian cruiser got through. The whole fleet went down. One of the greatest sea battles of all times, or one-sided sea battles of all times. Nelson didn't pull off anything at Trafalgar like the Japs pulled off at Tsushima in 1905. You don't get that much in your history, do you? Anyway, the Russians went down. It was necessary. Why? Because Russia was trying to build a railroad across itself, and Russia wanted a warm water port at Port Arthur, which they had rented from the Chinese. They didn't conquer, they bought it. You know, they're paying for it. And they were going to break into the Asiatic trade and give China an alternate route of trading across Russia to Europe, breaking the monopoly cartel of the Crown. No, the British built the fleet, trained it, and sent it to Tsushima to take down their ally, Russia. Of course, there's all sorts of little games going on, you see. Anyway, so at Tsushima, really we had a few other things as far as Russia's concerned, but let's stay with Asia. This war in China and in Europe, or in Japan, and this idea of breaking out was supposed to be the idea of Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek, you see, from 1911, led the nationalist Chinese movement to overthrow the Bank of England, which is called the Bank of Sung. The Sung family in China controlled the Bank of England's affairs in the Orient. All financial affairs in the Orient were controlled out of Nanking, which was the main bank, the Bank of Nanking, Bank of the Rothschilds. Operated, all the banking east of Damascus was under the Sungs. So here we have, in 1911, Chiang Kai-shek starts out, and he's fighting away. In 1927, Chiang Kai-shek is victorious. He seizes Nanking with Union of Soviet Socialist Republics troops, with his ally and friend and fellow student at the Moscow Military School, Mao Zedong. Mao and Chiang go and they overthrow the Crown, seize Nanking, and seize the Bank of Rothschild. Looked like victory Finally, a victory somewhere. Then Shang made a secret agreement with the crown. I forget right now how many millions in gold he was paid. But he was also promised that he would be president of China for life. They guaranteed him lifetime rule. That's why they couldn't overthrow. He had to have Taiwan, because they had to keep their promise. Shang carried out his promise, his end of the bargain. And these people are honorable men. They had to keep out their end. Otherwise, who would believe them in the future when they made another deal? See, you can't welch on a deal and expect to make another one. So anyway, here's Shang. Shang is now an operator of the crown secretly. These Japs didn't figure that out. They thought Shang was an Oriental with the dream of the Asia for the Asiatic. After all, he had led all of these years the nationalist Chinese movement. And he ostensibly had been victorious at Nanking, right? Here we have our champion. And Japan and China are going to unite together and throw out the round eyes. That's what those Japs thought. And the Japs were building their guns and waiting for the day. In 1934, they were ready for the move. In 1934, they made their move for their power, and now they went into Manchuria, the industrial base which they needed and the supplies, expecting China to join with them. Instead, they found resistance and war for the next 11 years. They were bogged down in this war of attrition in China, which Japan was not capable of fighting. They couldn't fight with their numbers that kind of war, a long, drag-out attrition war. Well, anyway, it soon became very apparent to the Japanese that something was very wrong. They and the Chinese and the rest of the Asiatics are supposed to be sweeping through Singapore and sweeping them all out. Instead, there's Japan's armies in northern China ground down in a log drag war with supposedly their ally, Chiang Kai-shek. By the way, do you know who Shang married? Madam Shang happens to be Madam Soong. Kind of interesting, huh? Madam Soong of the Bank of Soong, the Rothschild Bank. Yeah, all in the club. We keep it all friendly, right? And keep it married and you make sure that everything stays in the club. Anyway, of course, by the Second World War, the Asia for the Asiatic dream was totally destroyed, and that ended that one. And now two are down, Pan-Americanism and Asia for the Asiatics. Well, another one was going. And we could go into detail of this, but we see Germany in the First and Second World War. What do we hear from Schmidt and these fellows now today? What is their statement? Germany has no ambitions on her own. Germany does not have any international position. Germany has become totally neutral and without any direction or goal. What he's saying is we have abandoned pan-Germanism, which was, of course, the dream of the Kaiser and Adolf Hitler. That was their dream, to break out of the circle. Now, that leads to Pan-Slavism, which isn't much of anything, and the crown. And you wonder why we continue to move to a more and more world centralized power control. Because there is only one left. The others have all been destroyed. There is no more competition in the field. They don't have an enemy on the horizon. There is none. From this point of view, from an international point of view, let's now. Okay, my watch is. I've got the time mixed up anyway. I was just Mr. Welch. Those of you who are ex-Birchers, and maybe some of you here are actually even still affiliated with that thing. Mr. Welch attacked me one time because I made some statements about the Lusitania being a warship and carrying munitions and all of that, and he called it poppycock, that I was full of poppycock all the time, because that's all right. But Life magazine finally said what I said, so that makes it true, obviously, right? If Life magazine did it, who could question that? Something's wrong here. There we go. I'm trying to bring it. I got one of these zoom lenses and I haven't figured out how to run it yet. There it is. Well, anyway, Life magazine, after a while running me over, I'll put in a whole article. There's a book written on it. That article is from the book. Just to show you how conspiracy works a little bit. Here is the U-boat, the U-20 that sunk the Lusitania. The Lusitania, you were told, or the American people were told, was an innocent passenger ship on the high seas that was attacked savagely by a submarine. And of course, the submarines violated international law because the law said that a ship which sunk another ship had to take upon the survivors that other ship upon itself. And obviously the U-20 could not take on the passengers of the Lusitania, right? So this was considered a very barbarous act of war. Now let me give you just a few conditions. These are things in the article, by the way. These things I had been saying, but the Life magazine collaborated it, so we know it's true. One, the Lusitania was not an innocent passenger ship. The Lusitania was built by the Admiralty as a cruiser of the British line. Now, most of the ships, England ships, were made by Admiralty under government contracts as military ships, even though they were passenger vessels. They had all of their armament positions built into them. Just like after the Second World War, a lot of our airliners were built with Bombay positions built into them. They could be converted. I don't know whether they're still doing that or not, but for quite a while we did that. Anyway, the Lusitania, on the day the war started, sailed into dry dock to receive her armaments. And she was commissioned on that day as a cruiser of the line of the Royal Navy. She was not an innocent passenger ship. She was a cruiser of the line, commissioned in military service, armed with the armaments of a light cruiser. Now, next thing about the Lusitania. She went into New York Harbor with a new captain for this trip. This was then the largest vessel of the world. Went into New York Harbor, and where she took upon herself more armaments or munitions than any ship of the world in the history of the world to that date had ever carried. Under the guise of being a grain load. One of the reasons she sunk so badly was the fact it was not the torpedo that sunk her. It was the things the torpedo hid inside of her. A torpedo could not put down the Lusitania. She went down in minutes with holes all through her. The British Admiralty were in question, where are all these holes come from in this thing? It's supposed to be laden with grain. Anyway, the Lusitania was sailing up to come up the channel, and when they're coming up the channel, there was 3 different routes for her to be given, a signal off of West End there of what route to take. The night before the Lusitania came up the channel, they had sighted the U-20 where she lay. In those days, those submarines could move very fast. They knew where she was going to be in the morning. The Lusitania was ordered to sail up past the U-20. Now, the next thing is that the cruiser Juno was the protecting ship were coming up the channel. That is, the Juno was to come out and meet the Lusitania and give her a screen as she came up. The Juno that morning was called back by the Lord of the Admiralty into her port at Queenston, Sir Winston Churchill. All right? So the Lusitania, now sailing up there, and watch something else about the Lusitania. The American passengers, and there weren't very many aboard the ship, the German government had taken ads in major American newspapers and even had their agents stationed on the gangplank of the Lusitania to warn every American citizen that this ship was a ship of a nation at war. And they were going upon a belligerent ship, a warship of the line. And under the law, Germany had the right for belligerent action against her, and that the German government could not be held responsible for what would happen to an American citizen sailing under British flag of a ship of the line. The German government guaranteed safe passage of all Americans to England on American flag ships, but would not guarantee and could not give them safe passage on the ships of a warship. These people, for whatever reason, went upon that ship. Now, once you go and have the Lusitania sunk, we have the nice bodies carried in the waping and demand for war. You see, England at this time wanted the United States entry, and our government pressed for it. Wilson went for it. Now, Wilson's alter ego, the real president of the United States, was a man named, called the mysterious E. Mandel House. A very mysterious kind of fellow. But anyway, House was like Kissinger before he became Secretary of State. He went around the world making all the deals for us without any authority, apparently, whatsoever, except some authority, because he obviously represented some group that did mean something. E. Mandel House was walking with the Vice Lord of the Admiralty on the morning the Lusitania was coming up the channel, and the Vice Lord of the Admiralty said to E. Mandel House, "Mr. House, what would happen if the Lusitania sunk?" And House is reported to have replied, "I'm sure war can be arranged." Churchill left for France. He didn't want to be around because he was Lord of the Admiralty, and obviously he was responsible, so he dug out. And the torpedo slammed in. And they went for war, but our Congress at that time was still not into this conspiracy deep enough. They wouldn't go. They refused. Now, Woodrow Wilson now gets elected in 1917. He takes office for a second term, and what was his campaign? He kept us out of war. And what did he do 30 days after he kept us out of war? He went for a declaration of war, and we were at war. Nothing can lie like a politician, can it? Okay? Now, let's take a look at the results of the war, because that's what's important. One, in 1900, in 1900, Russia was producing 2% of the world's oil. In 1910, it was producing 52% of the world's oil. In 1920, it produced 4% of the world's oil. You got to take care of those competitors, don't you? Why do you think the Rockefellers and the boys gave $50 million to Lenin? Why do you think Max Warburg, brother of Felix Warburg, head of the Federal Reserve Bank, and Max Warburg was the head of the Bank of Warburg on Frankfurt on the Main, next door to the Bank of Rothschild, and Max Warburg is also head of the German Secret Service. Max Warburg takes Lenin out of Switzerland in his private train, a sealed train, and takes him to St. Petersburg to overthrow our ally, financed by Kuhmann Loeb, Jacob Schiff, and the Rockefellers. Where did Trotsky train his army? He trained it in New Jersey on the Standard Oil refinery property. And they sailed in 2 ships financed not by those guys. Somebody put up the money and gave them 2 satchels of money to go off to St. Petersburg to overthrow our ally, Russia, that was fighting Germany and supposedly saving American lives on the Western Front. Now, here just before this Lenin, who we say is just a little guy who kind of got in his train accidentally, somehow a secret train was made for him to get him to Russia. But before he left, here we find the Milners, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and all the big banking interests putting on a big dinner party for Lenin in Switzerland. Who's this Lenin at this big dinner party that all these guys are having for the bash, the biggest monopolists and millionaires and bankers of the world? Come together in their little club to put on this party for this little old communist that's going to go up there. No, it was not a revolution. It was an invasion. It was a financed invasion for the purpose of creating a transfer of title of the goods. Now notice, immediately in the 1920s, Standard Oil buys out the Nobel's interest in the oil fields in the Crimea for less than ½ cent on the dollar. Question, who produces the oil in the Crimea today? They don't really answer that question for you. I would like to get the answer. I'm afraid I don't have it. But I'm saying there's a lot more going on. Let's take a look at Russia for a few, or look at the, here's a Sunday supplement of the Chicago Tribune done on the 25th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. It's a 16-page supplement in which they show the pictures of our decoding machines that we decoded all Japanese code after August 1940. Showing and there in the communications and so forth and the diaries that the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor was known, the date and time of that bombing, on November 1, 1941. That George Catlett Marshall said that he would notify Admiral Kemmel. When the Admiral of the fleet said, I can notify him in 7 minutes by naval radio, he said, I'll see that Admiral Kemmel gets the message. He put it in his pocket and sent it on December 8th, 1941, by Western Union telegram. While they were putting out the fires, Kemmel got the message. And Kemmel was court-martialed. See? Not George Catlett, Marshall. Let's go and take a look, you see, back in 1941 and see, in 1940, October, Chicago, our president stood before the American people on radio and before the great mass at Soldier Field and said, our boys shall not die on foreign shores. He was reelected on that campaign. He was, on January 20th, 1941, he was inaugurated for his third term. February 19th, 1941, he declared war on Germany. Notice when I said February 19th, 1941, he signed the Lend-Lease Act, which is an act of war under international law. To give armaments and munitions to a nation at war is a declaration of war upon the enemy of that nation. Germany ignored it. A month later, the President of the United States issued this communication, quote, to all ships at sea, we are at war. Conduct yourself accordingly. Fire on the enemy flag on sight. That's not neutrality. 2 days later, this communication from Adolf Hitler, the Reichsfuhrer, to all U-boat commanders. In the sight of the American flag, disengage. Do not attack British or any enemy shipping in the sight of American flag. Disengage. Roosevelt was trying hard to keep our boys from dying on foreign shores, so now, in April 1941, one of our destroyers closing on a U-boat, of the German U-boat, was dropping depth charges on it. The U-boat surfaced and fired a couple rounds in its defense at the U.S. destroyer, inflicting very minor damage on it, and immediately the President goes to Congress for a declaration of war. Congress would not buy it. They said, no. Well, they had to go back to the drawing boards again. See? How are we going to get this war? In July 1941, the Secretary of War's diary has a little interesting entry in it. It says that we met our cabinet meeting today for the purpose of discussing how to get Japan to attack Pearl Harbor. They realized they had to have something bigger than a couple shells in a destroyer. The Lusitania wasn't enough, you see. We got to have a biggie. So in November 1941, we said because of the hardship of the economy in Honolulu, that the ships, all but the carriers, were ordered to spend Sundays in Honolulu to be able to spend the sailor's salary, make sure they were all nicely lined up at their berth for the bombing runs. The son-in-law of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one day I started talking to him, and he said, you know, they asked me about what kind of memorial Dad should have. And he said, oh, he already has his memorial. It's the 5,000 men he killed at Pearl Harbor. What, at Pearl Harbor? Well, they say 5,000 in those ships. 33,000? Well, that was even better memorial for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He murdered him. Yes, he did. Anyway, by the way, it's interesting to go through all the diaries of these different people and the stuff in this thing. Here we see Life magazine, again, source of all truth, February 1940. Here are some tank cars going to Germany, Nazi Germany. This is after the fall of Poland now, okay? Shell, Eastern States Standard Oil, Esso. Isn't that interesting? Let's look a little bit at the world. This is, I admit, about 7 or 8 years old. You might want to adjust a little bit, but it wouldn't be that much difference. This is the world by land area, all right? This is the world as distributed by production. Notice Canada's the little line at the top, Mexico's the little line at the bottom. Here, look how big Europe becomes. Look how small Europe is geographically. Look how big they are economically. See how big Japan gets compared to its little size? Look what happened to Russia, China. They disappeared, see? Asia, look at Australia. It's just almost not. Now by population, look at the population of China, the population of India, the population of Europe, and how small the population of the United States. This is standard of living. Look at South America's area. Look at its production. Look at its population. You see? Now you get kind of a picture of the economic basis of these places. We go to Russia. The word Kremlin means fortress. Every city has one. The Kremlin we think of is the Kremlin in Moscow. But you know, the Russians, when they were building the Kremlin, they built one of wood. The Russians never built a stone building or a permanent building. The Kremlin was built by Italians. The Winter Palace was built by Italians. The Summer Palace is built by Italians. The hydraulic and the canals of Russia were built by Germans. The munition works in Kiev were all built by Germans. All permanent structures in Russia were built by non-Russians. This is the original Kremlin, which was built all by Italian and French builders. When we take a look at the automobile factories, Ford built the Gorky Works. This is a Chrysler plant. All of the so-called factories were not built by Russians. They were built by somebody else. The Nobels developed the oil fields in the Crimea, not the Russians. The great, let's see, this is the Pleasure Palace. This is the little one. The Winter Palace is much bigger. Summer Palace is not anything to Slava. But again, all Italian construction. Here is, and this is the in-tourist map of Russia, the highway system. Those are the locations of fuel stations, gas stations, 27 gas stations. 27 gas stations in a nation of 250 million people? This is a modern industrial society? I was in Leningrad. Leningrad is a city of 3.5 million people, 4 million people. It has 4 gas stations. I saw 3 of them. I saw 1 car in one of them, and it wasn't getting gas. That's a modern industrial society. Between Leningrad and Moscow is only one road. 2-lane asphalt with gravel shoulders. That's it. There are no byways. You don't get off the road. There's nowhere to go. The same between Leningrad, Kiev and Moscow. Here's the road. Between Moscow, this is your highway. Every 25 miles or so, this is the picture going out of Moscow. I did something very bad here. Our guide is up front, and I asked if I could take this picture. And as you can see, it's pretty dark. But I had 400-speed film, 500-speed. And that's when it first came out, and nobody had it. All these tourists are sitting in Russia, and they couldn't take any pictures. All of the cameras were worthless. And I'm sitting there click, clack, clack, clacking away. They were all with 60, and 80-speed ASA's film. Couldn't get a thing. And I'm back. And she said, well, you can't take a picture. I said, well, I can get one. I took that picture. And then I realized I've got her in a real box. The driver is undoubtedly going to be a KGB agent. She's going to be hauled in on that one. But anyway, and as it gets out, it goes down to 2 lanes asphalt and goes on for across the wastelands of Russia. This is the ordinary truck in Russia. There are no semis. They have things what we would call a deuce and a half, very old-looking things, but that would be it, lorries. There they are. That's the biggest trucks you'll see. And this is a big crowd of them. You don't see this very often. I got this because this is in Kalinin. Anyway, the nice buses are for the in-tourists. Every 25 miles on all of the roads, there's a police booth. And all buses and cars stop as everybody is frisked and inspected and their papers are inspected. Except if you're an in-tourist bus, you go right through. The people on our bus never even notice them. I got there that night and I asked these doctors who were sitting down there and I said, hey, did you notice all those police booths? What police booths? Didn't you notice that every 25 miles there's a station and all those buses lined up with the people all out there lined up on that road? Can you imagine if we stopped every car and every bus in the United States on every one of our roads every 25 miles, how many police it would take to do the job? It tells you how many people travel. You see? You got to have a visa to go from one town to another. And you got to report into the police station where you leave, when you drive, when you start back, and when you get back. And report to the Soviet there and the Soviet here. Can you imagine if you had to do that every time you wanted to go see Granny? There is no travel in Russia, except by official travel where the state is going to take you all on this joyous holiday, people's holiday someplace. Anyway, it's a completely different world than you're normally thinking of. But anyway, we're now in the greatest store in all the Russias, the GUM in Moscow on Red Square. This is the grocery store. And there's a couple little chickens laying up there. There's 3 different kinds of canned goods. There's a can of caviar, there's a can of beans of some sort, and a can of something else I couldn't figure out what it was. But that's all. That's the total canned goods. There are no frozen goods, all right? There's no packaged goods. There's some slices of bologna, salami, and there's some cheeses, and there's some chickens laying up on a shelf, kind of hanging over there with their necks. They look like I grab one and slap them down. Pretty scrawny-looking chickens. There's very little meat in Russia. They don't raise much beef or meat. I didn't see beef is something you get very small portions of, and you know that's in tourist feed. These people live on wheat. I go into a restaurant, into a cafeteria. You go in the cafeteria, you pay first, the casa. You go down, and this is what you get. You have a choice of cream of wheat pancakes, wheat bread, and tea. That's your choice in the cafeteria. Oh, a bean soup. There was a bean soup. Mm-hmm. They live on wheat. They eat wheat and drink wheat. They drink wheat much more wheat than they eat because the whole nation seems to be drunk. They're bombed out on vodka. Just a nation of narcs or alkies. Now, when you get to things like the subway stations, they're something else. Every subway station is beautifully decorated by a different republic, all in a different thing. This one is done in an aerial thing. Some are done in all heavy marbles, mosaics, and things of this sort. This is looking up at the ceiling, these openings. So gorgeous stations, not a mark. The little tin boxes for change, and nobody robs any of them. Not like there's no writing on the wall. Because in Russia, everybody has a job and nobody works. They've literally got scores and scores of women in uniform standing around everywhere. Well, if we had a police force of 1/5 of the population, or we could keep people from writing on walls and smash little tin boxes to take rubles. By the way, you notice on their public buildings they have the big owl seeing eyes and so forth. But of course, we'll get into that a little more later. This is the little summer palace. One end of the summer palace, just outside of Leningrad, to the south of it. This was the German High Command headquarters during the siege of Leningrad. It's pretty well blown up on the other side. You see they're trying to redo it. And I don't think I've got a picture here of Polotsk. Now this is in Leningrad. Okay, this is the council chambers here. I'm trying to think of whether, well, okay. Down south of there is Polotsk. Polotsk is the hunting lodge of the Tsarevich Paul, given to him by his mother Catherine the Great, supposedly. Here is a magnificent palace. By the way, you see the summer, the little summer palace. The winter palace is about 5 times as big up in town. This is just a little summer residence to come down and get out of town. Anyway, Polotsk is quite something. Fabulous, fabulous palace. You think, boy, those czars really had it. You realize that these palaces were leveled to the ground in the Second World War. These palaces have been built by the Soviet government. restored in every detail, vastly more costly than in the first place, with all the buildings, the rest of the buildings in Russia all look like scrap heaps of just blocks dumped in. Their apartment buildings are all terrible looking construction, but not these palaces. These palaces and the cathedrals have been restored to perfection. And I'll go in there, with my guide, we're going into the war room in Pulaska. And here's a room with probably 300 fascists all the way around. It's all in fascist. And of course, they're supposed to be anti-fascist, right? Which is kind of interesting. And I look at the ceiling of the great Maltese cross and all the emblems, the Masonic emblems of the ceiling. And I sit there and I ask the guide, I says, Sasha, I said, is this, was the Tsar have anything to do with, what's all of this here, up there? You know, he says, oh, he had something to do with something down on an island in the Mediterranean. I said, Supreme Sovereign Commander, Order of Maltese Cross. Yes. They're all in the lodge. The rulers and the rulees. Now, what is the key to political power? The key to power is this, that there has to be two classes of people, an aristocracy, an elite, the inner club, the inner circle, the golden circle, or whatever name we want, and the rest of you slobs. Now, in order to maintain this, we must have a dual law system. There has to be, the law must be biased and impartial. It must be fair and just for all the rulees when they have a contest with other rulees. But the judges must be rulers. It must be the aristocratic class, that is, those people who are in the group, the ruling group, must control the courts. Why? So that a rulee cannot win against a ruler. If a rulee could win against a ruler, this would give bad ideas to that mob out in that street, right? Therefore, the courts are to be impartial between rulers and between rulees. But when it comes between a ruler and a rulee, the ruler must always win. We must maintain our position and our station. You see? The aristocracy must maintain its position. Therefore, if in a case of a serf, he might be killed for merely touching the garment of an aristocrat. Where if the aristocrat even killed a serf, it might not be a punishable crime. There is a total difference, you see. This is the problem with our country. When the Constitution was formed, the document is excellent. But the carrying out of it meant one thing of the constitutional republic, that there's only one class of people, that there is no conspiracy which says a group of people who say we will come to the aid of our brothers in the conspiracy, whether they be right or wrong. Once we have a conspiracy of a group of men who control the sheriffs, control the prosecuting attorneys, control the judges, and control the legislature, they will set up what appears to be just laws. The injustice comes in the carrying out of these. That those people that say, oh Lord my God, he'll give the grand hail sign, and I have sworn as a judge to come to his aid, secretly by conspiracy. Now notice this, every person in such a conspiracy is a liar, and every one of them is an oath breaker. Why? Because he took a public oath to be impartial, didn't he? Yet he took a private oath in the secrecy, because everything in secret is evil. If it is in secret, there was a reason for it being in secret, not to be sacred, but because it was an evil conspiracy. It could not be done in the light of day. That's why the Apostle Paul says it's a shame to speak of those things done of them in secret. Secret conspiracy, secrecy is for the purpose of covering conspiracy. And it means to the aid of the conspirators against unfair advantage of those who are not in the conspiracy. You walk in a court of law, and here's a man who happens to be under the same oath as the judge, the prosecutor, and the sheriff, and they almost are always going to be, and they have all sworn to come to each other's aid in a secret meeting, and when they're expected to carry that oath out, and here you are, you think you're going to come in there and get justice? Oh, they go through all the motions, but somehow you lose. How many times you see him say, oh Lord my God? That's when he said, the attorney says, I have no more arguments, I now plead on my oath. and your oath, you must come to my aid. Law is to be put out. That's the Grand Hail sign. You see, the Republican form of government requires a single law system. Without it, you have only the illusion of political liberty, but the key of slavery is a conspiracy in the courts of law. And if you want to see, in this country, you take a judge, prosecuting attorney, sheriff, find out how many of them you find in this country that haven't sworn a secret oath in private to come to the aid of other brothers into that order. You'll go a long ways. This is why the Republic, the Republic cannot stand. It cannot stand because it has within it this cancerous conspiracy which is unknown by its victims. The victims don't even know it's there. The key to this thing is that the rulers, instead of declaring themselves aristocracy, they have acted like they're one of the people, put on the clothes of the people, walked amongst the people, and kept their ruling class secret, claiming we're just a bunch of boys having some fun and getting a beer bash on Thursday night. No. That's maybe what they want the boys to think, but that is not what it is when they're called on to carry out that oath. Here we have an interesting picture. Here's the Russian generals and the German generals. This is before the Second World War. See, Hitler's maneuvers, he couldn't have maneuvers in Germany because of the Versailles Treaty. So the German maneuvers were conducted in Russia. And in turn for that, the Russian officer corps was trained at the Berlin High Command School. Zhukov, the victor of the Battle of Berlin and the Battle of Stalingrad, where was he trained? In the German High Command School, Berlin. All part of the club. Adolf Hitler was one good Mason. Tool Society. We find in Russia, in the Second World War, they had only one piece of equipment which was capable of fighting in modern war. It was up to standards, not necessarily superior, but in that area we were a little deficient. Well, our one weak area, and that was tanks. The T-34 was as good a tank as the United States had during the Second World War. But outside of that, in all other armaments, Russian equipment was so inferior that it almost, you can say, didn't exist. Notice the Russian fleet, how many times it came out in the Second World War? Not at all. The Germans sent 2 destroyers in the whole Black Sea, 2 destroyers, and held the entire Russian fleet bottled up for the whole war. They never dared sail out of port against 2 destroyers that roamed at will for the whole Second World War in the Black Sea. And all of the Russian air and naval might could not take on 2 German destroyers. You know how small a destroyer is? Unbelievable. These are aircraft. This is the Air Times magazine. And these are pictures of some, Second World War photos, but I want you to notice a few things on the side of this aircraft. Shell 80, Standard 100. This is in the Africa campaign of Luftwaffe. You see, up until 1943, over 93% of the production of the Venezuelan oil fields in Maracaibo, Occidental Oil, 100% owned subsidiary Standard Oil, was shipped to Adolf Hitler. In 43, when the situation had been created that they wanted to create, now they turned the oil off. See, Hitler was so dumb, he thought he was going to get that oil. He had the equipment, he had tanks, he had all sorts of things. They couldn't go. His aircraft were being destroyed on the ground because they couldn't take to the air. They shut off his gas. All you have to do is have that one key ingredient, right? Withdraw. You can't see this too well because it is kind of light, but this is a picture we're given in our newspaper of the new Tupolev 4 airliner. This is 1947, showing that Russia now has the biggest and the most modern air fleet, air flat in the world. If you look at that picture, you'll see the blisters, the gun blisters and the bomb bays. This is a B-29. The Russians captured 6 of our B-29s Well, because remember, in the Asia, while in Europe, Russia was our ally. In Asia, Russia was Japan's ally and our enemy until 2 weeks before the end of the war. So anytime our planes couldn't make it back to Okinawa, they had to land in Russian territory and they were captured because Russia was our enemy in Asia while they were our ally in Europe. Isn't that an interesting one? You wonder how these boys come up with these things. Anyway, here's the Tupolev War. Tupolev, the great aircraft designer. A few years ago, we were building our SST supposedly, and of course, England and France are coming out with the Concorde. Have any of you ever seen that thing? That's a beautiful piece of airplane, I'll tell you. It's something, I mean, just from an aesthetic point of view, it's a thrill to watch that thing go out. If you can get enough to block you from the vibrations of it. But Russia, of course, had to be able to look like they had one, so they built a Tupolev 144, a supersonic airplane that they had flown at 1,500 miles an hour, they claimed, though it was never on radar over 400 miles an hour. When it landed at Berlin, it scraped its engines coming in, and they had to throw blankets over it so nobody could see the damage of the thing. But there was a man in the nose wheel cranking the nose wheel down in the nose wheel cavity by hand while it was coming in for its landing, which is an interesting piece of work, you know. It landed, and the plane is made of aluminum, lapped, riveted aluminum. Lapped, not even butt. You can't fly an aluminum airplane at 1,500 miles an hour. 400 miles and 450 miles an hour is max speed for a lapped aluminum airplane. Now, they never carried passengers in this airplane. They only took it to air shows. And I was telling people at the time, this thing is a phony. It is a phony baloney. Sure enough, the wings came off it at 240 miles an hour at the Paris Air Show, and it crashed. 240 miles an hour, and the wings came off of the thing, and we were told in our papers that this great 144, the SST of Russia, right? You know, I mean, if we invented a lead balloon tomorrow, Russia would have to come out with a super lead balloon, or at least a picture of one, and deliver it to us, and our papers would print it. Here's a little book called Russian Space Hoax. I had hundreds of these and never read it. I had some guy that gave me cases of them. One day I read the thing. Well, this is my last copy. And more people got them. But anyway, we'll take a look at the Russian Space Hoax. I want you to notice here. This is the first man in space. Notice the diffused light on the helmet, and notice the oval helmet. Okay? Now, this is the lone man in space in the first spacewalk. Notice again the diffused light on the helmet. Another view of the same man. Notice the light of our astronaut in space of the spark of light, you know. Because there's no atmosphere to diffuse light and no hydrosphere, light will only come as a starburst, never diffused. To be diffused on a curved surface, you must be in hydrosphere or atmosphere. You cannot be in a vacuum. If anybody doesn't understand that, well, just pop up. Here's the first spacewalk, and here's this man coming out going on the first spacewalk. Who's in space taking his picture? Tell me where the cameraman jumped out there. Now we have the same spacewalk, but this is the TV film. But you will see, he now has changed helmet in space, which is very nice, because he had an oval helmet in the movie film, but he's got a square lens in the TV film. Now that has got to be a trick of tricks to change his helmet in space. Again, we're back at the, notice the background. There is none. We have this odd line around him. Now in space, because there is no atmosphere or hydrosphere, you either have white or black. You don't have the diffusion of grays, and in the creases are all black, if you look at the American one. This line here, the Air Force Intelligence and Kodak blew this up, and they said this picture was made by 3 pictures separated by glass. And that's what causes this line around here. They took it frame by frame, took a film of this guy with a blue background with infrared film. And then they took a background, which they have in this very fuzzy background, and put that back there, and they were showing how they make these triple exposures and able to superimpose one on the other. So the only problem is a very sloppy piece of work. Notice here the U.S. astronaut. Here he's out there. Notice his cords coil all up in space. The others isn't. It's drooping. It's still in gravity. All right? The Russian. Notice the black and the white. You see? The complete contrast. Notice the background. Here we have the movie film with this astronaut in space, and we can see the hook and the cable that he's hanging from. The Air Force drew in the line of the cable a little better for you to see it. A blue cable with a blue background taken with infrared film. Here the Russians put in for the world speed aeronautical record, and they're given the certificate of their stopwatch, which was used for timing the space flight. With a stopwatch. Here's the picture the Russians sent us of their miniature circuitry for their missile. This at the same time as ours, on the same scale, circuitry of the same circuits done by Westinghouse at the same time. There's one thing, if that's the circuitry, they never got off the ground. There's no amount of propulsion that will drive up that kind of equipment. Here's the picture the Russians sent us of their command space headquarters for the spacewalk. Hello, Maisie telephone, a couple of the operators, and there they are. If that hadn't got in backwards, it would be even a little better, but if all of you stand on your head, you'll get that. These are the only places that the Sputnik movement of the beep beep was tracked. It was not a movement, it was tracked. The beep beep was picked up in other places in the world, but there was no apparent motion to it. But this is Sputnik 1. Oh, that picture's never going to come in. Anyway, what does it take to do that? 3 trawlers in the Atlantic Ocean with directional antenna and about $400 worth of equipment out of Radio Shack will give you a motion beep, 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 beep. And that's all they ever had. And I say, here is cosmonaut Titov. Inspects the Mercury capital during his visit to the U.S. after his claiming flight of 17 orbits. Titov never once mentioned the Firefly effect. Do you know why? We hadn't been up there yet to see it. And he never saw it. In his report of the flight in the dossier submitted to the FAI. But after astronaut Glenn had made his flight report of the phenomenon, Tita said he also saw it. Yet here he's in a flight and he's to record everything. There's not much really going on. And he doesn't see the Firefly effect, the most spectacular effect of all, and doesn't make a mention of it. Well, anyway, my point is this. Let's go back here for a second and let me finish up. Russia as a military power simply does not exist. They have kings because we give it to them. We gave them an atomic bomb in 1948, complete from trigger, right out of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. We delivered the whole show to them. Why? Because the American people wondered, what is this thing over there that we keep losing to? I mean, who are these people? So they had to pop a bomb off so they could tell you that if we didn't continue to have billions and billions in taxes, if we didn't continue to send our sons all over the world, then our alternative was the bomb. And you couldn't do that unless they had the bomb. Read the book of the War for the H-Bomb by the head of security of Oak Ridge, who tells you about the delivery of that bomb to the Soviet Union. They had to create an apparent enemy. How else do you think they continue to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of your money over the years and have one war in one place after another? We've had over 50 wars since the founding of the United Nations for keeping the peace in 1945. We have been on a war budget and a war economy, maintaining a war level all the time because of some paper tiger that doesn't exist. In 1945, the U.S. military might was greater than all the world combined. There was nothing left. Russia was bombed and destroyed. Germany was gone. England was gone. France was gone. China was gone. Japan was gone. Who was there? We had to create one in the newspapers to continue to have ever-increasing separation of you from your production. Tell me where in the Constitution the United States government has any authority to give a foreign aid to anybody, anywhere. Yet they continue to give billions upon billions and billions. And you know why we have trade deficits? We don't have trade deficits. We've run trade surpluses almost the entire time since the Second World War, with very few exceptions. Our deficits are in payment deficits because of the foreign aid. You want to know the trouble of the dollar in the foreign markets? It's called foreign aid. On what basis does our government have the right? Where were they elected to support the world? There's nothing in the Constitution for such a thing. To go into every government, every time there's any squabble anywhere, we sit in there, we negotiate, and we say you'll get the money if you play ball and if you don't. To buy so-called friends, we've never bought any. What it is an empire. You know what empire is? I'll tell you how to determine an empire. An empire is any nation whose military might is widely dispersed in other nations, and where they sit in on the negotiations of problems of other nations around the world. Have you ever seen anybody in Bhutan and Nepal have a fight tomorrow over some rock on the side of a Himalaya, and we're going to have a British and American ambassador in there right away to sit and negotiate the matter, and if they do it, they'll each get 25 million. Tell me the authority that these people have. Where? For what basis do we have maintaining a military force all around the world? You know what it costs us for that? And the amount of money spent by our military in foreign lands, which we have to redeem, which is destroying the value of the dollar on the foreign markets and the foreign exchange? What right do we have to maintain a military anywhere? Remember, they called it, before the Second World War, it was called the War Department, wasn't it? Then we changed it to Defense Department. But since when we had a War Department, our military was in our country. Since we have a Defense Department, we have our military everywhere. It's on every continent. Our ships are in the air all over the world. We have to have our bases everywhere. And we're constantly going in and fighting to maintain this base, that base, and this base. And in order to get these people happy in Spain, happy in Afghanistan, happy in Saudi Arabia, happy in Okinawa, we constantly have to support one population after another population in order to maintain so-called defense. From whom? Well, the newspapers create the enemies. In Vietnam, what were we doing in Vietnam? Can you see any legitimate reason for the United States in Vietnam? Was that defense? Couldn't possibly be. You see, we have had a war standing budget now since 1940. 41 years of war, of billions upon billions upon billions upon billions, and all we've so-called lost everywhere. And now every country sits there, and they're all, like all welfare checks, they're all on the narcotics. If we want Nicaragua to come in line, we just threaten we cut them off, and they obey right away. They hop in the hop. All right, in the hopper. Sure enough, we've got them all on the dole. We've got all American citizens who don't want to work in the dole, and we put all the world in the dole, and we put all the governments in the dole, and all the dictators in the dole. Tell me what we're doing with giving aid to Russia. Why are we shipping trucks to Russia? Tell me what we're doing shipping all of this stuff to Russia if they're an enemy. Here they took away billions and billions for decades from me and you for the purpose of what we call building our defense against awful red China. Then one day a ping pong ball, blunk, 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 and we surrendered. A ping pong ball in one day. After taking hundreds of thousands of millions from American people totally illegally. Because they had to have it. Because of the awful beast. There is no difference between the using of Russia and Hitler's using of the Jews as his reason. Remember, everything Hitler did, he did lawfully. He passed the law and the Gestapo carried it out. But why did they do it? For the good of the state, for the defense of the Reich. These people are dangerous. We must do it. Why does the government claim they need more and more powers to overrun the rights of the Americans? Because they need to raise taxes. They got to collect these taxes. They have to do it because for the good of the state, for the good of the Reich. Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer. Who are you to disagree with our wisdom? You go in the courts, you know what they say? In the wisdom of our Congress, they have decided this matter. What wisdom? They have a constitution they're supposed to obey. No, they have some divine wisdom. You see? This is a little town in Germany. This was not done by atomic bombs. Now, let me go back and explain a little something to you. We have a thing called urban renewal. They go in and they sit and say, we're going to have this area in a nice new GM plant in Poletown in Detroit, you know. Or we're going to have this nice little thing. GM doesn't go in there and buy those houses and pay the money. No, what they do is they go in and they sit there and tell everybody this place is going to be condemned. You'll have to move. So the people start moving, the churches start selling, the businesses start selling, and they start going out. And the people who own that property, the landlords, sit there and they say they can't rent. And they can't rent. The taxes stay on. The bills keep coming. Who's going to buy their house? Their house, which was worth $30,000, is now worth $5,000. I bought a house one time for $38,000. You know what I got from the city? $3,000. They, for 5 years, went there and knocked on the door telling the tenants to move because they're going to condemn it, and then it was postponed, 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 postponed. While I sit there and losing my shirt in this thing. A little 4-flat. Finally, they give me $3,000. Why? It was vacant and all smashed in. Why was it vacant, smashed in? They cut off police protection, they cut off garbage services, they cut off everything and left me there. This is called slander, public slander. They slandered my property. They give me $3,000. Now the city takes my taxes to pay for that stuff. They buy it up even at $3,000 and sell it for 10 cents on a dollar of what they paid for it to General Motors. Tell me, on what authorities General Motors have of seizing these people's property? Their homes. We're supposed to have a lodial freehold. We're supposed to be, it's supposed to be our castle. Yet the state Supreme Court of Michigan says that the whole town, Poletown, we're talking about several thousand families. I'm sorry. You're sure you've had this community, and sure you were born here, and you've lived here 60 years, but Granny, you got to get out. We want it for a parking lot. And the city paid for it. GM gets the land free, and then they give them 11 years of no taxes on it. And they did this for what? To bring employment to Detroit. They're going to close down the Cadillac plant on Clark Street with 9,000 and open up the new one with 6,000. Now tell me where we got more employment. We lost 3,000 employment. We lost the tax on the Cadillac plant. The new one gets 11 years, no tax. We had to pay the taxes to buy the land, and the people lost their homes. And that's allowed in the land of the free and the home of the brave? Free enterprise. That's free enterprise, that's right. If you got the muscle, you get the thing. What do you think government is for? Government is the tool of those people who are in power to extract from those people who are out. Remember what the Constitution was written for. To bind down the government with the chains of the Constitution, to restrict them from doing these things, to protect the people from the government. The government, the majority is the enemy. This was not set up as a democracy. Democracy is the worst form of government of all. Democracy says if the majority wants something, it's all right. If the majority wants murder, it's okay. No, it is not. The Constitution was written not to protect the majority, but to protect the single individual from the majority. It was to protect your rights from everybody, that those rights were given to you by God, and that the purpose of a just government in that Constitution was to protect those rights regardless of how many people wanted to take them away. You see, the total reverse of the government school system is to reverse your whole thought towards law and for government. That the government, because of the needs of these people, have the right to overthrow the rights of the 1st, 4th, 5th, the 7th, 9th, 13th, and 14th Amendments. After all, we have to have compassion for this person. You realize that our government, federal, state, and local, take $32,000 for every poor person in this country for poor programs of one sort and another? That if all the money taken by our governments were given to the people who were classified by the government as poverty, at poverty level, there's $32,000 apiece for every one of them. A family of 5 should be getting $160,000 a year. Are they getting it? No, they're not. You realize what the rake off, the take off, the commissions are between the time the tax was taken from you and it was given to that poor guy? No, that money wasn't given for poor people. It was given to buy people and buy things for those who are inside the deal. The poor people thing is a screen. Oh, you got to give out a little bit, but don't give away too much of that stuff. It is a sham. And we all know it's a sham. The other day on the radio was an interesting thing. There was a commentator who says, I finally figured out why the liberals are in such trouble. I was at the airlines. And you know what happened to the airline? I noticed something. All these people got all these bags shoving on this airplane trying to convince the steward that this bag would fit in her cupboard and that this really would go under a seat. And the place is jammed now with baggage. You know why? They've lost confidence in the baggage service. They don't believe that the bag is actually going to come off that airplane in Pittsburgh. They don't believe it. And he says, do you know what's happened to the American people? They don't know anything too much about it. All they know is that they keep putting bags on this government train and they don't come off. Somehow the baggage gets lost. And they're saying right now, well, let us carry our own baggage. We're willing to haul our own baggage. We don't want any more baggage service. They've lost confidence in the system. They don't know much, but they know one thing. Something's awful big, this gap between the amount they take and the amount coming back. Well, let's go to urban renewal on the grander scale. Let's go into the bulldozers and knock out Pole Town. As we decide that we have to urban renewal this area, you also have bigger urban renewals. You see, all of a sudden it's decided, for example, that this land use is not the most efficient land use. Back in the turn of the century, in the last century, the people in Europe invested in America. America wasn't built just by Americans. Our prosperity was built by German and French and English investors. Most of the money that developed our railroads, our canal system, our oil, our industry, our steel, was foreign purchase of bonds and securities. We were financed from Europe. Why? Because we had better potential. Younger country, all the materials and so forth, and it was going to be a bigger growth industry than Europe. Europe had tapered off. The United States was going this way. Well, obviously, if you're going to invest, you want to invest in the best place, don't you? Now, what happened at the turn of the century? They came up with an idea that the United States was developing pretty well. We better look for the next one, the next real growth industry. Isn't that what any security investor does? And so they looked around and said, where would it be? Well, they were looking for an undeveloped place with lots of resources, tremendous amount of manpower, and an undeveloped market. And as they looked around, they said, Russia. Lots of territory, kind of like the United States, about the same population, lots of raw materials. Russia will be it. And so, after they had seized Russia by financing Lenin and the boys, they went in there and started building Gorky works and other factories and so forth, but they were being built by Americans. But what happened in Russia? They built the plants, they put the stuff in the one end, and nothing came out the other end. Somehow, nothing comes out the other end in Russia. Then they learned something. It isn't the basic raw material is the nature of the people. Russian people basically are agrarian, agricultural people, never have been industrial type. They have never been mechanically type. They're basically people of the earth. And they just didn't produce. Same in India. All these companies went over to India, going to build all these plants with the cheap labor. Nothing comes out the other end of India. This guy cannot possibly work for that guy because his caste is such and such, and he doesn't have, and I can't be promoted because there's 200 other people with a caste here. There's 450 castes. No way to run a system when you cannot promote and when you cannot give incentives and so forth of a caste system. The whole thing stops. Dead. You build all the machinery and it goes, dead. Nothing comes out of the end of the thing. The only way that you can get a plant to work in India is you isolate it into a separate village, take your people in there, re-indoctrinate them, train them, and keep them isolated from the rest of India, building a small island, a camp, if you want, a kibbutz. If you're trying to take people off the street, you can't do it. The system won't work. Well, there's other reasons, but I can't tell you that. Anyway, so what did they do? They decided we made a mistake. Next time, we got to get the basic ingredient that is a provable, proven population. Now, in Europe, what was the best proved population for industrial production? And what about in Asia? Japan. Now, they became our enemies. Germany was through at the end of 1940, 41. But the war had to continue on. We had to sit in England. We had to sit there and, for example, and you can read these right in the high command papers. Here is in 1943, Clark sent this communication to Eisenhower and to Marshall, saying the Fifth Army, which performed so poorly in Africa, today is the finest fighting force in the world. We can destroy Kesselring in 2 weeks. We'll be at the Austrian border. It's interesting that the next day, Kesselring sends to the German High Command in Germany permission to withdraw from the Rome line. We cannot hold. Clark can smash me at his will. I demand withdraw to the Alps where I can defend my positions. What happens? Eisenhower orders to withdraw of amphibious equipment, artillery, and tanks from the 8th Army, or what was it, 5th Army, wasn't it, Clark, and leaves them there unequipped so they could not advance. Why? The war was scheduled to last until mid-45. Why? It wasn't defeating of the German military that was important. It was the urban renewal program. They went over there and went with the competition, smashing it in the most systematic demolition of that competition. Now, after the war was over, who rebuilt Germany? Was it those people who had no soup, no food? Was it those Germans that rebuilt the industry in Germany? They were wiped out. Was it the French? They were wiped out. The British? They were wiped out. The Russians? They were wiped out. Who financed that new operation? Obviously, it came from America. Who financed it, I believe, owns it and runs it. I think whoever put up the money runs the show. Who owns Mitsubishi? How many, what percentage, what is it, the Standard or General Motors owns 53% of the Japanese auto industry? I don't know what Chrysler and Ford owns of it. They're fighting in, why aren't they fighting the war, the import of foreign cars? They're their cars. It's Americans who lose a job. Do you know why? We're too high priced. Our labor is high priced. They don't want to produce them here when they can produce them in Japan cheaper, right? I mean, after all, if you're going to survive in business, how do you do it? You go into the most competitive place, don't you? You go where the least costs are to produce. Otherwise, somebody else is going to, and you're going to get wiped out. You either get there first or somebody else is going to get there. I want to tell you who built that Japanese industry. It wasn't those Japs. They had nothing. Those big, here's the bulldozers that work in Japan. The only nation in the world reduced totally by air power. That's exactly what they were. And I want to show you. See, when that bomber was flying and that picture was taken, Japan had already surrendered. In March 1945, the Japanese imperial government, and this was even on the CBS documentary, the Japanese imperial government sent this communication to the United States government. The Japanese imperial government is prepared to negotiate terms of surrender on any conditions the United States shall dictate. That sounds like unconditional surrender. You know what the State Department said? We had difficulties with the translation. They sent it in English. You mean that nobody in the United States can read Japanese? They had such difficulty they didn't read it until August. Why? The home islands hadn't been hit. The bulldozers hadn't gone to work yet. Tokyo wasn't destroyed till May 9th and 10th. Nagoya got it on the 10th and 11th. Yokohama got it on the 11th and the 12th. Oh, the bulldozers hadn't wiped out that competition. The war isn't against military. There's Tokyo getting it. 95% of the city destroyed in one night. Winds at 50 miles an hour in a paper city with an incendiary raid. We didn't use explosives. We dropped mass scattered incendiaries. One of the greatest conflagrations in the history of the world on a nation that has surrendered 2 months earlier. And we wouldn't let them surrender. Nagoya. Hiroshima. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were only 3% of the destruction on the Japanese home islands. 97% was the high explosives and incendiaries. All of it dropped after the war was over. This isn't to condemn the United States people, the American people. This is the avarice, the greed in the heart of man. Who rebuilt those plants? There's Mitsubishi. Who rebuilt that? The Japanese have been on quarter rations for 6 months. They hadn't had any soap for 4. Do you think that they rebuilt those plants and factories over there? Do you think that was done by Japanese? Look, I'm an economist. You build your plant and equipment out of your surplus production, your production in excess of consumption. They had no surplus production. Their consumption was running 3 and 4 times production after the war. Then who built it? Whoever built it, I believe, owns it. We then go into Korea. We run up the peninsula, down the peninsula. We can't bomb the Yalu because the war has to last long enough to do what? To destroy the old society while we build the new superhighways, the new power system, the new lines, the new airports, the new dock facilities, all in the case of war fighting communism. And when this war is over, at the line where they started from, and 55,000 American bodies, plus 200 and some thousand more casualties of people with arms and legs missing and other parts of their body, then we see the new chemical plants, the new GE generator plants, the insulation plants, all the plants. Who do you think built those? Those Koreans carrying those ammunition cases at Pork Chop Hill, do you think they built those new plants? When you see all this stuff built in Korea, those things are all from plants financed not by Koreans. They don't own it. They are nothing but a new urban redeveloped area. They have just as much voice in it as the people in Pole Town have in the Cadillac plant. We go into Vietnam. Watch this game. We run around in Vietnam. We don't have a front line, so nobody even knows whether we were losing for years. You go and take this town and give it back tomorrow night. Then you go over here and take that and then give it back tomorrow night. You kill here and you don't shoot them until they shoot you. If the missiles have to be fired before you can bomb the missile site, or you can't bomb the missile site to fire it. If the road truck is 150 feet off the road, it cannot, and it stopped. It is now a house. It is not qualified as a vehicle, and you cannot shoot it. You've got all of these things. You can't dock the docks at Haiphong because Standard Oil's refinery is there, and they're picking up their oil to take it down or out of Hanoi. The Standard Oil refineries you see in the Far East are Hanoi and Singapore, and they were bringing the oil down up the Haiphong River, delivering it to the Standard Oil commercial dumping tanks, which were in communist hands for 8 years, while the Standard Oil trucks, the regular Standard trucks, go up there, get their gasoline. The communists don't stop them. They drive out every day for 8 years, drive to our helicopter pads, and sell the fuel to the U.S. government. Made in Hanoi. That's why we couldn't go and behind the Haiphong River and cut off Standard Oil's oil shipments to our military in the Haiphong and the 3rd and 4th Army District. No. We had fought a war. What kind of war? A war in which we kept our armies suspended in the air on gasoline and oil at the maximum possible cost with the minimum amount of men. To operate ships, we take the battleship, what was it, the Arizona, not the Arizona, but Nevada, wasn't it? When we recommissioned it at so many billions of dollars, sent it through the Panama Canal all the way across the Pacific. It fired one salvo, sailed all the way back, went back into the dry dock, and went back into mothballs. It's something like $4 or $5 billion it cost to the American public for one salvo. Everything to use the maximum amount of fuel. Standard Oil made a bundle. Anyway, this is right in the Syracuse News Times. And by the way, this is in most of the college newspapers. I'll show you the other half of this. This is the picture here. This is April 27, 1972. This is just before we pulled out of Vietnam. What happened was, in this article, it tells us that now Standard Oil has opened up its new refineries at Singapore. The new refineries are opened, and at this time, the Hanoi refineries, which were built in 1934, are shut down. Immediately, Nixon becomes a hawk and mines the Haiphong River, which nobody could do for all of these years. Why? Singapore had, the Standard Oil refinery had to get built. Once the refinery was built, now we could mine the Haiphong Rivers and we could get it in a hawk position. Now, they're asking the question, here is the map of the oil concessions of all of these different oil companies. Conco, Getty, Conco again, we have, and Shell, and Esso and Clark and Shell. These are all, remember, we're talking here about 500 miles out to sea. Now, will you tell me how I have an oil concession in the middle of the ocean? Who gives it to me? What nation do I get an oil concession from? Who made that concession? Was it made by oil companies getting together and dividing up the world? Was there a conspiracy here involved? If you and I would go up there with a little oil rig and pull it in the middle and we drop a thing down, was somebody going to come up with a gun and tell us to move off? Is this a territory, a national or sovereign territory that can be defended by military might? Tell me who divided this up. What international law? I know of none. I know of nothing that takes us outside of the 3-mile or 20-mile limit. Do you? Now, just going to conclude this in a minute. We're going to have lunch. But watch here. Right here is Vietnam. And we're still in Vietnam at this time. On this edge of Vietnam, on the west edge, is called the U Minh Forest. Ever since 1945, the South Korean Vietnamese government has never been able to put a troop in the U Minh Forest. The U Minh Forest was the headquarters of the Viet Cong. Now, a friend of mine who happened to be the pilot for General Westmoreland 3 times over, and he came back because he was in charge of the southern district, the 4th district, of all the helicopters, and up at Phnom Penh. He was the commander of it. And he came back because his wife was having a baby. In Vietnam, it was a different kind of war. In the Second World War, when a wife's having a baby and you're an officer, you get to come home. And then you go back. See? I was sitting there one day and having lunch, and I says, what's going to happen now out there? He says, well, we're going to take the last week, we took the forest, U Minh Forest. You took it last week? Yes. I took it in 48 hours. How did you take it? And there's an island out there. We're going to take that today. You mean you're going to take it? Yes. The operation should start in about an hour and a half. The orders have been given. And it'll be fall in about 2.5 hours. We will kill everyone on the island. Everyone? Yes, every last person. They will die 2.5 hours. They got the orders. Turn on the screens. Those guys down in those bunkers are down underneath those things. That infrared picks them up. Choop, 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 choop. You don't miss one. Now, how they get the U Minh? Screens on. All the choppers, turn them on. Go right over there, and those guys down those bunkers, and then the flames. All you do is you start the napalm. The South Vietnamese Army and the solid lock arms now move right through. They burn every inch of the U Minh. They bomb every single bunker. Everyone is killed. They take it all according to schedule. 48 hours is done. Couldn't get in there for 10 years. Not a person could get in there. I said, why? He said, I don't know. So next time he's back, I said, ask about Standard Oil when you're over there. Because he, I told him, I said, they're selling you fuel, aren't they? That fuel comes out of communist territory. And he thought about it, and he said, that's right. It does. And I said, you notice they never shoot up a Standard Oil truck? They never shoot up a Standard Oil tank farm. Why don't they shoot up a Standard Oil? Standard Oil is not an American company. It's international. It's a company of the world, isn't it? Now, what happens? He comes back and he says, you know what they're building there? They're building the largest refinery in the Far East in the U Minh Forest, Standard Oil. It's just broken ground for the biggest refinery. Now, what has happened? The new highways are in, the best telephone system in the world. We rebuilt Saigon. We put in all the new dock facilities. We built all the base for a new industrial base. And they're building the new refinery. Now we turn it over to the branch managers. Don't think those guys are going to get out of line. We walked away because the American people had paid for the capital investment under the cloak of fighting the Viet Cong. That's the rest of that article. Rebuilding Vietnam shouldn't be all that difficult. It's already cleared. Shopping center on this area. 4372. Not much new under the sun, is there? You see, what we do, we have these little wars, but they're urban renewal programs. Watch one more, the oil business. The United States has such a glut of oil. We have no need to import one drop of oil for the conceivable future. Why do we? Why do we limit production? Why are our wells all being brought in and capped? Because what we're doing is we're giving a welfare or foreign aid to the Middle East under the guise of buying oil. If we wanted to bring those people to the knees, they'd be brought to the knees in a week. The reason they're not to their knees is because we planned it that way, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt said it. If it happens, it was planned that way. You see, when you got people playing God who sit there up in Illinois in Northwestern University, they have a map of the world bigger than 2 football fields under a roof. And these people walk around in that map, putting down all different elements where everybody lives, and they are replanning, reshifting the development of here. What's going to be urbanized? What's going to be this? Where they take. These people are walking around as gods. They dream up a scheme. And they have that scheme in their wonderful dream and program. SRI laboratories out in California run all of these studies through their big brain tank of 3,000 scientists coming up with sociological and demographical restructuring of the populations of the world. All on government contracts at $3 billion a year fired into there to come out with all of these programs of what they're going to do to these people and what they're going to do for these people. Remember, everything they do for you, they do to you. Did you ever think of that? The government can't do anything for you without doing it to you. And they can't give you anything they didn't take from you first. And they always take more than they give back. It's always a bad deal. It's always bad. Well, it's time for lunch, and we're going to break now for lunch, and we'll reconvene when we get ready. The cafeteria is going to be downstairs for the lunch, so I guess we go out here and go to the other entrance? Oh, right down here, the stairs.